everyone. Welcome to the Everyday Real Estate Investor Podcast. I am excited to have my friend Daniel Derrick on today.
We're friends.
I would consider us friends.
We're friends.
Are we not friends? Because
like
we're going to have a conversation after the
Off
podcast
camera,
now, right?
yeah. We got to hash out how close
I got to see
we
where
are.
I'm at. Very excited to have Daniel here. Real estate investor, entrepreneur, business owner, family man, lots going on. So we talk a lot on this podcast about incorporating all these things in your life, and how do you, as a busy person, still be involved in real estate and take advantage of real estate and the power of real estate investing. So I think you're a great person to have on because you've got a lot going on, a lot of different things, personal and business and all of that stuff. So we're gonna get into it. So why don't you start by share a little bit about kind of how you started in the real estate space, what you're doing now, your business that you started with, and kind of how that's transformed into what you have now.
Yeah, it's kind of been an iteration, multiple iterations of this deal, because you and I have known each other for years now, but originally it started back when we were both in the mobile home space. We started Living Hope Properties specifically to flip low-income housing, and it was a limiting belief, just the beginning of it. I can look back now and say the reason I started with mobile homes in general was I was a broke, mid-20s guy, and I'm just like, I can't afford.
Bar's lower, right? So it's like, okay, I can do that. Yeah.
I'm from Texas originally, so I hear all these guys in Texas buying homes for, back then, 120 grand, selling them for 170, whatever. And it's like, that seemed a lot more doable than tackling a $300,000 house here, selling it for $450, $500. This is circa 2017.
I was going to say, we don't have those anymore. So
I know. Yeah. Remember, this is 2017 we're talking about. But so it was like my entryway in real estate was bigger pockets, as most people are. It's funny, I was working at Costco, and a coworker just randomly was like, you should listen to this podcast about real estate investing. I actually thought he was trying to sell me something. And I was like, oh boy, he's wanting me to learn how to sell something or whatever, because I just didn't have didn't really know anything about real estate. Bigger Pockets podcast, 150 episodes, just binged all of them in about a year of stocking shelves and listening to podcasts. And so my thought was, I'm living in this really expensive market, nobody can afford anything, and that was back when we thought it was expensive in 2017. Right. And so I was like, well, I can get these mobile homes for 30 grand, 40 grand, and fix them up, sell them for 120. So these are very entry level the ideas, concepts, and found you on MH Village looking for mobile homes. I was just scouring all the local cities for mobile homes, and you showed up in Newburgh, and so I gave you a call, and we kind of hit it off, and then found that you were my competition. You were actually doing the same thing I was to some extent, and I think we both had goals and dreams that were beyond mobiles, that were beyond low-income housing. We wanted to grow, but that's kind of where I started. Found out that you really need to move a lot faster than I thought. I was pretty green in business, so I didn't really realize just cost of doing business. Mm-hmm. So I was hyper focused on a deal. So I would take what I bought it for, what I'm holding costs, all these things. I forgot I would fail to factor in things like just time. I'm getting paid monthly, so I was paying myself out of future profits at that point, and so quickly after a couple of years got behind, because you really needed to flip 5 to 10 of them to really turn a profit.
Yeah.
So after 2 years, I realized man, if I sold all the houses I'm doing right now, I would still be in the hole. And so
you had a small crew, but you had a crew. So you had
a small crew. I was paying those guys really, really well, because I had a concept, but I wasn't in construction. I really didn't know a lot of things, so I was missing huge pieces of my of the puzzle. And so about 2 years in, we realized we were going to have to do something for just cash flow sake. So we started Living Hope Renovations, a general contractor. We got our general contracting license and started doing stuff for other people. Again, our paths mingle, and we helped you with a project way out in Clackamas with renovating one of your mobiles. and then we started doing that for other people. And the hardest part, and I kept getting feedback from my guys that it was really hard to go from roofing to flooring to painting, just to yank back and forth. They were like, if we know what we're doing every day, then we can do it. So we knew renovations really was only in its heyday for about a year, maybe a year and a half. And then we were niching down to, we had to analyze, what made us the most money, what was the most profitable expenditure of time, and what was scalable. And so out of that was birthed Living Hope Roofing, which is the third and final, hopefully, iteration of Living Hope.
We'll see, right? Time will tell.
We will see. So now we have Living Hope Properties, Renovations, and Roofing. And roofing is really the business that kind of took. So we've put a lot of time and effort over the last couple of years into building, scaling that. It's a very scalable business, predictable. It has a lot less variables than, a kitchen, which
typically, typically you can show up, you kind of know what's going to happen, and you knock it out and you move on to the next one. Versus a renovation, I mean, once you start opening things up,
it's a can of worms.
You never know what you're going to find.
Yeah,
you just know it's going to be not what you think it's going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the hard part is people, what I found is customers hate changes. They hate the change orders. They hate to bank on something, and they think when you give them a bid, that's the word, that won't be changed.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if I find everything in everything in your walls, then I have to change the bid. Like things are going to change.
You can't see what's behind it. Yep.
And it took somebody with a lot more construction experience to navigate that, because obviously there's tons of GCs that do great work and they know exactly what they're doing. They know how to be profitable. I'm not saying it can't be done. I just wasn't good enough to do it. So roofing is kind of where we've landed.
Okay. Now, so speaking of being predictable, not even a roof is not necessarily predictable, right? We were talking before we got on the podcast here about your latest deal and how that kind of came about through a roofing project. That's how it started. So talk about your latest project, kind of how that morphed from a roofing job into
everything,
something totally different.
Yeah, so I mean that's the interesting thing is something I learned from Brandon Turner, Bigger Pockets, right? It was those guys talked about tools on your tool belt, and how the person who solves the most problems wins, right? That's a phrase that's stuck in my head, that if you can solve the most problems, you win in this economy, because capitalism in and of itself is a voluntary exchange of goods for services. So it's like if you offer them a good amount of services, if you can fix someone's problem, they will give you the money to do it.
Exactly.
And depending on how good you are, you get paid handsomely. So with the roofing, I still come on to problems that we haven't seen before. And this was a roofing project that we'd never come onto a problem like this before. We went to, it was a very simple roof, basically a $15,000 roof that was not complicated, 2-story but low pitch. It was a simple roof. But we took off part of the roof and discovered that whoever had constructed the roof previously, the roof was only 10 years old, and the homeowner was saying there was multiple leaks, multiple dry rot, lots of stuff going on. And so we tear off the roof expecting this to be like a day job, a very quick turnaround job. This was a year ago, last September. And found that whoever had previously done the roof, you had 2-inch TNG on the ceiling, which was the basically what presented on inside the home. It was a vaulted ceiling, TNG. It was beautiful inside, but on top of that, they had hard boards of 4x8 sheets of insulation, the hard battens of insulation, and then directly on top of that, they had put their shingles, right? So you've got no plywood, no ventilation.
On insulation,
directly in. The craziest thing
is
my guys freaked out because when they pulled up the roof, they yanked up the roof, and there was literally electrical boxes just sitting there exposed, and those were the lights that were hanging in the house.
Oh my gosh!
And there's no plywood, there's no nothing. It was a mess, and I had never seen that before.
Well, I would hope not.
I was like, this is unusual. So we were like, we didn't know if we wanted to build down but we knew we had to build in, the ventilation space. We had to get real insulation in there, and then a real deck to put the shingles on. And so the problem was we were planning on this being a day job. I think it was a Thursday. And instead we had to just pause and tarp it and basically just tell the homeowner we're going to have to come up with a cohesive plan to basically re-engineer your roof because it's not going to be a day job. They live like right on the river in West Lynn. Beautiful home, beautiful views. And that weekend, I don't know if you remember this, but last September, the first rain of the season came in, and it was a torrential downpour Saturday and Sunday. And so we tarped it on, I think, a Thursday, and then Friday night, the rain moved in, and we were unaware that wind comes off of the river at 3-4 times the speed. You know, basically it's a wind tunnel, and it whips right through their house area, and we had nailed down our tarp with boards, like anchored it down into the roof. You know, pretty much standard stuff that we've done. And the wind came in, tore up the boards, tore the nail out with the tarp, the whole thing. I got a call around midnight. I was asleep. Got a call around midnight, and this lady was like, "My house is flooding," and her husband was out of town, and he calls me from, I think, like the Carolinas or something like that. So it's middle of the night for him because he's 3 hours ahead. And he calls me and leaves me a voice message. I wake up at 5 a.m. and see multiple text calls that my house is flooding. And I don't know if I've ever had a worse morning.
That's not, yeah.
Yeah, so I jumped in my truck.
What you want to wake up to, yeah.
Yeah, I jumped in my truck and I was driving ungodly speeds to get over there. I show up, and this poor lady opens the door, and there's water cascading down out of her ceiling into her living room. She's standing in an inch of water with a broom, and the first thing she says is like, "Hey, welcome," or something like that. And I was like, oh my, I've never experienced anything like it. And both the husband and the wife were just the most gracious people in the world. Like, I would, like, personally, I can say I would have been furious. I would just have lost my mind with somebody if I was in that situation. But they just rolled with it. They were like, it is what it is.
That's crazy. Wow,
yeah. Yeah, so I quickly ran up in the rain and tried redoing the tarp, you know, and I called my guy who had put on the tarp and told him to get his rear end down there to help me, and we re-tarped it. And we estimated, I mean, basically it was a 2-story house, so it was only about a quarter of the roof that was exposed, but we ruined their living room, their couch, TV, drywall that went top floor and bottom floor, insulation, flooring, carpet downstairs. I estimated $20 to $25,000 in damages. And yeah, so it was one of those moments where you're just like, I was super grateful that they were okay with it, but we went in and demoed it ourselves, and then turned on a bunch of fans and dehumidifiers and got it all dried out in there. And the lady was just mentioning as we were talking, and I'm apologizing, and I'm like, I'll go buy you a new TV right now. I'll go buy you a couch. You know, I'll put your life together again. But I was telling her, I was like, I don't really want to put in new floors and new insulation and drywall until we figure out what to do with the roof, because ultimately, you know, I don't want to flood new materials.
Right,
so
yeah.
That was like the priority. So we paused everything, and we just tried to get them to where they're living in not as much of a disaster. And but I listened to her as she was talking, and she's like, I hate this house. You know, her husband had bought it before they were married, and she was just like, you know, I never voted to live here. She has 2 daughters. One of them has special needs, and it stressed her out because this house is built inverted, where the living space is upstairs and kind of the extra use is downstairs. Mm-hmm. So you have to climb stairs to get to the front door, which is a little unusual. But the reason is you've got a wall of windows that looks directly out to the river. You've got the river views. But the house was not constructed perfectly. The whole deck system, the railing was built without 4x4 supports. So the whole railing system was just built with 1x1 battens. And so the whole rail shook, and their special needs daughter was like, they were stressed about her being, you know, navigating stairs. They had a pool out back, in-ground pool that was a danger. You're 200 yards away from the river and the dock where boats are coming in and out. Trucks are driving into the dock area.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of things.
So there's a lot of hazards for,
Yeah. So she was, I was hearing her say, I don't like this house. And, I'm 4 years in and I'm predominantly roofing business, but as we both know, real estate investing's at the core of our hearts. So that's where I wanted to be. I always wanted to be flipping houses and owning real estate. That's really where I began the journey.
Yeah.
So with that tool belt, I was like, well, there is the option for me to just buy this house. So I asked them what would it look like to sell it. I was like, have you ever thought about just selling it? And they're like, yeah, but we.
And she's like, yeah,
every day I think about selling it. Yeah, so basically she was just like, they told me what they owed on it. They owed $400 on it. And they were like, we'd really like to get like $600 or $650 for it, something like that, because we need to take that and go get into a new house. And he's like, I know it's worth way more than that, but I don't have the $150 grand to fix it. So
right.
So I was like, I think I can work with that. I brought in my realtor, got an ARV. And was like, okay, let's do this. So we ended up picking it up. I ended up buying it for $620. I really would have offered $600, but I figured we did $20,000 worth of damage to it ourselves. So we ended up purchasing it for $620.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So you took a situation that could have been really bad for your business, really right? Bad, you were gonna have to fix this property. It really was. Needed a lot more work anyway. They didn't have, the ability to maybe do what needed to be done with the roof to even take care of that. So just like, what do you do in that situation? You have a seller that can't fix their roof. The roof needs to be done. Now it's leaking. You've caused a bunch of damage. What do you do? And so you ask a question, right? So
ask a question, yeah.
And so it's funny because my last episode before this one was basically don't make assumptions. So if you making assumptions is how you miss opportunities, right? And so you could have looked at it like that. Our only solution is we just got to make this right and just fix the problem and figure out that solution. And like you're just in that box, right? And then you're like this little well, what if they are open to selling? And it'd be really easy to say, well, they'd never say yes to that, right? Or like that's a crazy proposition, right? So, but you listen to them and you heard it, and then you asked the question, and it turned into an opportunity for you, but it actually ultimately got them out of where they really didn't want to be into something else, right? So
that's really the win of the whole story is that that mom, like, for one thing, I just wanted to do something nice for them because I was like, she's just so gracious. Like, I could imagine being sued, punched in the face. I don't know. I probably deserved.
You never know. Yeah,
I deserved a lot of things for all of that craziness. They were just so kind and generous with everything. So now they've gone. I hooked them up with a realtor that had been working with me. Fortunately, not you. Sorry, man. But I was working with.
There are some other good realtors.
There are others. Yeah. Not many better than you. But yeah. So I hooked him up with a realtor. And he helped him. Her priorities were maybe not single level. She didn't mind 2-story, but like predominantly on the first floor for her daughter's sake. Fenced in backyard so that there's a little safety. And
I'm guessing a non-leaking roof was probably
non-leaking roof. Something where she never has to see me again. That was the stipulation. No, so she had like a few things. No projects. They had a lot of open projects that the husband works a lot of hours and he's like he can do those things. So but it wasn't getting around to him. It's the honey-do list that we never get to.
Yeah.
I have those at home
right
yes. Now. My wife has a honey-do list that hasn't gotten to. So yeah, it was like she now got into this house that's only a couple of years old. You're 20 years away from needing a new roof. It has no projects. He has his garage that he wanted, the enclosed backyard. There's just it hit all the points. So they were able to put down a hefty chunk on that, get out of a bad situation, and not have to live through the construction of us fixing, because even though it was our fault, they would have still had to be living through us putting in new floors and sheetrock and rebuilding the roof and all these things. And their special needs daughter specifically has issues with sounds.
Yeah, I was gonna say like loud noises and stuff. Probably.
What is it? Stimulation overload or whatever it is. But yeah, so she was kind of plotting how they could like be away while the work is being done, and suddenly the project was now turning into a couple weeks that they would have to be gone, and just nothing was fitting very well. So getting them into the house, it was truly a win-win-win, because Living Hope Roofing, the company, didn't have to suffer this great loss. And then this couple also was able to get into a house that they liked.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing is a lot of people get the idea that real estate investors are cheating people or we're trying to take advantage of people by paying them less than their house is worth. And a lot of times it's just solving a problem.
Yeah, 100%.
And that has value. So.
100%. Yep. I totally agree. And I mean, that's what it's about. If you're helping someone get from where, I mean, they're the ones that put the price out there, right?
Yeah.
And so
that was a cool thing. I just said, what would it? Right. What would you want to get? Yeah. I have no idea. At that point, I didn't even know what the ARV was after repair value. I don't know what the ARV is, so I was like, I still need to bring in a realtor, but I can explore this if it's something you're interested in. And what I heard from her was, I hate it. Right. So I assumed maybe she'd
be open to that.
Interested in the idea.
Yeah. So like you said, providing solutions and you're helping people get from where they are to where they're ultimately trying to be. So you're solving that problem and helping them get there. And I found that like they probably wouldn't care that you make money, right? They expect you to make money, and that's another. I think people like because there are people that almost like try to hide that they're trying to make money. They're like ashamed that they're trying to make money, and it's like most reasonable people understand that you're in business to make money, right? And so like I think every house that I've ever remodeled, and that they're always like, man, I hope you do really well on this. Yeah, I hope you make a lot of money on this.
Every time. Yeah. It really is the case.
Because you're solving the problem. That's all they care about. Is like, hey, I'm getting what I need to do, what I'm doing, and if you do, I want you to do well now because you're helping me, right?
Yeah.
So leading with that.
So where it is now, I mean, that was only a year ago. It took us a good 6 months to kind of unravel the problem and get it purchased. So that was, I think we purchased it in April and just finished the remodel. 2 weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago, and just listed. So we're sitting at 1.05. I know this never happens, but I actually went over budget with my rehab.
What?
Insane! Like, who does
I've never done that.
The material prices dropped multiple times while I was working in my dreams. Yeah. And so it was like everything. You outpaced what I was going for. If this was listed 6 months ago, I think we're probably listing about $200,000 more.
Yeah, ouch.
So there's been a couple, like the market's shifted. Obviously, interest rates have gone to, historically not a crazy place, but recently insane places. At 7%.
And so quickly, yeah.
So people are kind of reeling because of that. I think also, especially in a luxury market like that, where you're flipping a 7-figure home, you're also thinking about the kind of people who are buying that house are usually the kind of people who have money in the stock market, and that also is getting hammered. So maybe that's where they were going to pull their down payment from. So I think really what we're hoping to find at this point is a buyer that maybe has cash, or they've sold a house and they're transitioning into this house, and they're not just having to come up with the money. But as of now, we've been listed a week, and so it's all theoretical. It was all a great idea theoretically. So at this point, the house hasn't sold yet. So.
Yeah. I didn't make it to the open house, but I did see the pictures, and it's a beautiful remodel. So.
Another mark against you, man.
Hey, man, I had kids soccer games, so sorry.
That does take priority. I will always put kids first. That's fair.
Yeah. Let's. I think that seems like a good transition point. So. Challenging project, right? Okay, wasn't really planned. Kind of came about as a like, hey,
you had a mild bombshell right in the middle.
Yeah. So challenge with work, with business. You've had a couple challenges with family, and lots of stuff going on there. Kind of one thing right after another. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about that, and then how you've been able to work through that, and still. Manage your day-to-day stuff that you got to deal with and provide for your family, right?
The funny thing is, when I started this business 5 years ago, I kind of started it with the idea that everybody wants 3 things in their work life. It's financial freedom, time freedom, and doing something that you love, right? Almost every time people create, they pick a field that has 2 of the 3, right? where you do a ton of work, you work all the time, and you make a ton of money. You love what you do, but you don't get a lot of off time. That's a common one. It's the overworker or whatever. Yeah. But I was originally going to school to be a dentist and didn't care about dentistry at all. But I was like, hey, I'm gonna have time freedom. A lot of dentists I know only work 4 hours a week, and then they make obviously good money, but I didn't care about it. So I was like, I'll sacrifice the passion part for the things I want. When real estate came along, the idea was, oh my goodness, you can, for some reason, God gave me a love of real estate that my wife questions all the time. She's just like, why do you love real estate almost as much as you love me? And I was like, I don't know.
At least it's almost.
It's almost. Sometimes she has a question like, is it almost or is it too much? But yeah, I mean, it's always been like, it sparked in me this passion to be like, oh man, I love this, and it has both financial freedom and time freedom. So it's kind of like the trifecta. And so I, in my naive brain in 2016, 2017, as I was learning about real estate, plotting my way into real estate, I thought by 2021, I would be a multimillionaire with, 100 units, And then the real life kind of slaps you in the face, and sometimes it feels like we're running on the treadmill and we're like day to day nothing changes, but then you look back and your whole life has changed. Yeah. And that's really what I've felt like is like when we first met, I feel like nothing's changed in my day to day since then. I drive a truck around, I solve problems, I do some contracting, do some back end work or whatever, but then it's like everything's changed. It's like I'm nothing like I was, and it's a progression. So
I want to pause there really quick because I think that's a super important thing. It's really easy to look back and be like, man, I have not hit my goals that I set. Mm-hmm. But you're still improving and you're still moving forward. And this is, I'm not going to mention specific podcasts, but there are a lot of podcasts out there. That was one of the reasons that I wanted to start this podcast and talk to people that are out there doing it and struggling and but still making it happen and still pushing towards their goals and their dreams, is because let's talk real. And there are people and there are a lot of podcasts out there where like they really focus on like getting like all these units and being this big investor, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's really easy to look. I mean, there's a lot of people that's their goal, and then they don't hit that because they're busy with it, and that's not the norm. I don't think to go out and buy a few hundred units or 1,000 units over the course of a few years. People do it absolutely, but if you don't do that, then you feel like a failure, and it's like, well, I tried and now I failed, so now what, right? So I just because I think that's super important to say, hey, I'm not where I thought I would be, but that's okay. And things have happened that I didn't expect. And everybody's got their own story and their own journey, right? And so if you're comparing it to, hey man, that person went from 0 to 500 units over 3 or 4 years. Like I didn't do that. You beat yourself up about it, but really you don't know their journey or their story really. You know the parts that they shared. And that's it, right?
That's it. Anyway, that's what I've discovered is comparison is the thief of joy.
Absolutely.
And it's like as much as I enjoy podcasts that I've listened to so often, it does give you almost unrealistic expectations. And I've always heard when I was getting married, don't go into marriage with expectations because bitterness, anger, all those things come from unmet expectations, right? You expected your wife to do this, she did this, and it's not that this is that bad, it's that you expected this. It's about the divide between expectations and reality. And so for me with this, it took me years to feel my way through, okay, I'm a failure, to no, I'm not a failure, I'm just moving at a slower pace, things aren't quite as clean as HGTV has you believe, and even like this story we just said, it's a wild success story or whatever, where I turn a $20,000 loss into a gain or whatever. But right now we mentioned briefly, I went way over budget. We're around $80,000 over budget. Market pulls back at the same time, so suddenly this margin of $250,000 turns into right now it's like, oh man, we're tight. We still have a margin, so it still could be considered a win. But suddenly I'm like, I really wish I could have one of those grand slam $150,000, $200,000, $500,000 wins that I hear about, and it's like, it's again, expectation versus reality. It's like they may be giving you fluffed up numbers, they may be giving you whatever, or maybe they just actually have more experience and did a better deal than you, and you'll get there someday. But,
right. And I think it's probably a little bit of all of that, right? Or it's like, you hear about the person that starts a company and builds it and then gets, now they're a billionaire because they took their company public, and it's like the reason you hear about those things is because they're the one-off, right? And they're successful, and they're like, not everybody does that. So if everybody did that, you wouldn't hear about it because it would be normal. Yeah. Right? So
it's funny, whenever I feel overly stressed or worried about whatever I'm doing, the first thing I look at is gratefulness, right? Am I losing track of am I being grateful? Because in our perfect world, most real estate investors, entrepreneurs, we all have this morning routine where we do our affirmations and our quiet time and our exercise and our gratitude and all the things that we read in the Miracle Morning or whatever, and we're like we're gonna be grateful and we're gonna start our day with all these things,
and then the first phone call comes in or you pick up
and then you're just thrown off immediately. So but I do go back to that. I'm like, usually I feel like when I am down in the dumps, mentally spiraling and embracing every limiting belief and all those things, usually it is a lack of gratefulness to look around and see, where I was and where I am. So all this leading back to your original question.
I was going to say.
I am coming back to that. So the point was, last summer, because this summer's over, summer 2021, my wife was pregnant with our third. So we have Marcus born in 2016, my daughter born in 2018, and then 2021. Madeline, we were pregnant with a little girl, and June, the week before Father's Day, my wife called me and said she's on her way to the hospital. She'd been sick the whole 6 months of pregnancy, pregnant in January through June, and it just literally like couch ridden. Just the kids are running amok. I would come home and make dinner most nights, and put the kids in bed, and after working my stressful job and everything. So it was definitely a tough season those 6 months. But then my wife called me. It was just like, I have to go. I called an advice nurse, and there's a problem. She gets admitted that night, and is, I believe, hospitalized almost a week, just shy of a week, and then has our baby at 27 weeks, born at 2 pounds. She went down to 1 pound 10 ounces, I think, 1 pound 11 ounces, something like that. Just ridiculously
crazy,
small. Yeah, she literally fit almost in my hand. She's a baby down to my wrist, something like that. So crazy. Just tiny. Yeah. And they immediately whisk her off to the NICU, and she has this massive CPAP machine on her face. And they just warned us that, they're like, just so you know, when they have a CPAP for months at a time, it deforms their face, and like all these things. And my wife is feeling traumatized because, she had preeclampsia, and that was she had preeclampsia with all 3 kids, but this time it like went nuclear way too early. But by the grace of God, I mean, she did fine. Like, fast forward 3.5 months, she basically was in the hospital from late June to late September. She came home the week before my birthday. This week, actually, last year, she came home from the hospital, and that was the first time I realized I had a crew doing roofing. I had an assistant at the same time that this was going on while she was in the hospital. My assistant, who I'd pulled in, relapsed on drugs, ended up stealing some money from me, and I had to fire him. He was supposed to be the one kind of keeping everything afloat while I was taking care of my family, and he had his own struggles, so it was just a mess. Like, it was just a crazy time. And I mean, honestly, so we had 6 months of her being sick. We have this baby way early. By the grace of God, she's fine. She didn't have any heart issues, eye issues. Like, there's a lot of stuff that, really should develop in utero that wasn't developed, so it had to be done. Yeah. She's dealing with preemies basically just have to deal with a lot more because they have the outside environment, all the outside stimuli that's hitting them, as well as developing what used to be developed, before you're born.
Right.
So it puts them behind. She's still at this point 15 months old, and she's not even 20 pounds. She's just a tiny little thing. I think she's in the first or second percentile in all her stats, but not even walking. All of our other kids by one were walking. I say all of them, two of them. The other two were walking. That's all. I have so many kids I forgot how many. But yeah, so she's doing great. But because of that, when she came home October 1st of last year, I took a week off, or a week or two off for paternity leave, which, if anybody knows entrepreneur life, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, right.
The idea of just stop work,
Yeah.
It's not exactly like that. So it was a super stressful time with that. And then the doctors are like, we really need you to not go to church or not be around people for around 6 months because of it's RSV season. Respiratory issues are a big triggering factor for her going back to the NICU. So for 6 months, we don't really go anywhere. So October through March, it's just we're under house arrest.
Crazy.
We get done in March. My other daughter, my 4-year-old, starts showing signs of something being wrong, and she starts complaining about pain. She's always been really, really tough. She has an older brother who roughs her up. She's always the one pops right back up. I'm okay, and away she goes. And she started tripping and falling and complaining about pain, and she picked up a watermelon. It was big, but kids are made of rubber, so she screamed like she had thrown out her back, and we were just like, we actually asked a nurse, and we were like, do kids throw out their backs? And they're like, no, not really, very rarely. So we're just kind of watching these things and trying to figure it out. Around that time we got COVID in May, and then I don't know if my kids picked it up or how, but we got mono. The whole family got mono. I was like, I don't even know how that happens. And I was like, so we were all super sick and I blamed it on basically coming right out of quarantine, if you were, for the kid. I was like, we're now getting back into society and we're just picking up everything.
Right.
But that was in April and May, and we were just sick after sick after sick earlier this year. And then June came, the 1-year anniversary of my daughter being my wife going to the hospital to have this baby super early. Happened the week before. It was the Wednesday before Father's Day of 2021. Wednesday before Father's Day of 2022, my 4-year-old gets diagnosed with leukemia. That's what all the issues were. She was, we were seeing those issues, and my wife had a brother who had leukemia when he was 4 or 3. So she kind of knew the signs a little bit, and so the excessive pain, she would fall off the couch and just walk around like an old lady, arching her back and holding her back like crazy, super random stuff. And it was like, this is not usual for a 4-year-old to feel like that kind of pain. And so we went in. We actually went in May, and the doctor kind of just dismissed the fact, her concerns, my wife's concerns. And then in June, we went in, and my wife was just insistent that we test for leukemia, and they said, we'll let you know in 48 hours. And 4 hours later, they called us, and they were like, wow, get in the hospital right now. Yep, get in the hospital right now. And 4 hours later, and that just was radical, because we were 3 months into this giant, biggest project in my life. The roofing company is hitting all kinds of record numbers, as far as that goes.
Right in the thick of it with roofing season.
Everything's going crazy, and and this hits like a bombshell, and then it's like we don't know what this means. How long does treatment take? I mean, how dangerous is this? Should we be worried? Is it 50-50 shot? We don't know what her survival possibilities are, because cancer is the dreaded word with your kids.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and then you go from taking her into the hospital, just to get tests done one Wednesday morning, to you're in the hospital for the next week. So it's straight. So it's suddenly we're back in the hospital.
You're like, oh, this
2 Father's Days in a row spent in the hospital with 2 different children. So
wow. How do you get through that?
Oh, I think with well, with the Lord, I mean, really, he's been the rock for us, obviously, but our church family has come up huge both times. We do have insurance, thankfully, so we were covered in a lot of ways. But both times my sister started a GoFundMe for us, and we just saw friends, family jumping in, meal trains, bringing us food. Just that community was huge. And it's funny because you get into life and you start, especially when you have kids, you start feeling isolated unless you really try to pour into relationships.
Very
You're like,
true.
I used to be friends with them, and then we both had kids, and now
Right.
I kind of know them.
Yeah.
But it is funny how it's really the way we were built. We're supposed to be this way.
Yeah.
I could go into a whole thing about how the community is supposed to be the one that takes care of the needy instead of the federal government, but we'll leave that alone. So yeah,
I think you just did. I think we'll leave it.
We'll just that one line says everything.
I love it.
But yeah, our community did it. Like it was
Yeah.
like that. That's really we've been at our church I've been there for 12 years and married my wife there 4 years after I got there. So we have deep, long-lasting connections with a lot of people. Family is local. We have a little bit of family local and stuff like that. So, it's been one of those things that ultimately what I've discovered is specifically this time last year I really felt let down by my crew because when I needed to be out and focused on my family in the hospital, it all fell apart.
Yeah.
1 year later, we did it again, and this time it worked a lot better. He was my project manager. Now he's my business partner, TJ. He really just picked up the ball, kept everything running. We had pivoted into subbing a lot of crews, so we had a smaller staff but a bigger workforce, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so the machine that we had built in the last year worked.
Yeah.
And that's when I started realizing, nothing changes day to day, but then you look back and everything's different.
Right.
It's like,
right.
That's what had happened. It's like, oh man, in a year we diagnosed problems and solved them, and then the next year we had a chance to test all the systems.
Right. It's almost like the first time with your daughter being born premature. It's like it exposed all of the
weaknesses.
That you didn't know were there. Right.
Yeah.
You were and then like it exposed the thing with your assistant and like things that maybe you would have gone on longer.
Mm-hmm.
And just like faults in the system and all that stuff, and then it's like okay, but then you did something about it, and you changed some things, and then it got tested and it worked. So that's a big part of being a business owner and an entrepreneur is you're not going to do it right the first time, okay? It's just like because how could you? You've never done it before, so that's you learn and you screw up and you adjust. Or at least you should. Yeah. And you do better. That's
I think it was. I think it's Jocko Willink. I don't remember who said it, but it was the idea of brief, execute, debrief, and it's. I believe it's a military term.
Probably.
That's who. That's. I think it was Jocko that said it. But the idea is before you go into a battle or whatever, you brief on the mission. Like this is what the goal is. Then you execute. And then the big key is you debrief after. Like, did it work?
Right.
Because if it didn't work and you're all just whining about it, and then you brief for the next mission, you didn't solve any.
You didn't
problems.
learn the lesson, right? You didn't. Yeah. The last part. I mean, all those steps are important, but the last step, the debrief, is the one that I think people forget a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's really easy. You look at a project. This is what we're gonna do, and we're gonna do it. And then you go and you try to get it done, and then you either do it well or you don't, and then you forget. It's like, okay, now we're on to the next one. Yep. And you forget to do the last step of debriefing and okay, why did it go well or why did it not go well? What can we do better? All of that stuff that's important to being better and improving on the next one and or not making the same mistakes, all of that. Yeah. Right? Very, very key.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is it's like everything in my business at this point is I'm trying to figure out where are the weak points and how do we fix it. And the interesting thing is getting into the market and stuff like that is it's such a dynamic thing, because it's like I know exactly what it would take to make my business double in size next year. There's a couple key positions I need to hire. We need to get this system in place, that, whatever. And the interesting thing is the added factor of this recession that we're not in, if you ask Biden, but we're in a recession. But like we're in this, and you know, depending on who you talk to, it's going to get worse. Jerome Powell just said the other day, you know, this is going to hurt. Like
right.
He's projecting out, and he's forecasting for us that, you know, he's going to continue stomping on it until we can bring this inflation down. And so what does that look like with, you know, inflationary bills being passed by Congress and like all of this together? Are we going to see stagflation? I'm young enough. I know you're a mature man, but I wasn't around. I wasn't around in '08. So I'm like, I'm looking for roofers, contractors that lived through, you know, '08, '09, '10. And, you know, what did that look like? Because I don't want to go chips all in on my business, hire the key pieces, and blow up my operating, you know, costs if we're going to suddenly see that front side contract, and suddenly, instead of people, you know, fixing their roofs, they're going to repair their roofs. And maybe all these people with 2 and 3% loans don't want to sell their house, right? Because they have to go then buy 7%,
right.
7% interest. So suddenly you've got people holding on to their houses, which, you know, I'm super curious what your thoughts are on that, because I see two different options. One, the supply gets shrunk because people hang on to their good loans, and they're like, I don't want to have to expose myself. The other thought is, now that Jerome Powell's saying, okay, we're going to continue this, and interest rates are going to continue to climb. I read somewhere that interest rates typically climb and stay for like 2 years on average before they start to recede back. So if we're talking about all of 2022, 2023
being 7% or
something like that, does that mean that people are like, oh shoot, I need to sell my house now before it gets to 9%, you know, assuming that it gets there? So you see how people could go two different ways.
You could extrapolate either direction on that. I think I said on a market update recently, I was talking about how it's ironic that there's always a reason for people to not put their homes on the market. Like for the last, you know, till this last spring and the year or two prior, it was like, well, I want to sell, but then like I have to buy, and like how am I going to do that? I'm going to sell it. I'm going to get multiple offers the first weekend, but then I got to go and try to compete against everybody else to buy. So I'm just not going to sell. Okay, so that made it worse because now there's less inventory in the market, and there would have been more inventory, but they just couldn't figure out how to make it work. Well, now it's like, well, I would sell, but I refinanced because I didn't put it in the market because I didn't sell, and you know, now I've got a 3% interest rate, but I have to go buy it 6.5%, 7%. And there are some solutions to that. You get creative with rate buy downs and things like that. You know, there's ways to get it much lower than the market fixed rate. You know, seller concessions, things like that, or just paying points up front. But people don't necessarily know that, or they don't think that far ahead, and they just say, hey, I got to trade this and for something that's the same price or more, you know, because prices have come down a little bit, but not a ton, at least not yet. Right. Depending on what sector of the market.
Leveling off.
Yeah. So, you know, it's like, well, now I'm not going to sell because of this, right? So that's the point. It's like there's all these reasons they didn't want to sell because of they couldn't buy before. Now they don't want to sell because interest rates are higher and they're fixed in. So it's just going to be more constriction on the supply side, right? So we're still really low inventory. Builders are pulling back. You know, they're being a little bit more cautious
with inflation and with the way housing prices are going. What's the incentive to building?
Right.
You're spending more than ever,
and they got and a lot of people got a lot of these big national builders got burned in the financial crisis, so they're a little more cautious now. They want to make sure they're not oversupplying the market, and so we've on the one hand we're like way undersupplied still,
right?
But on the other hand, it's, at a certain point, there's a threshold where interest rates can only go so high before everyone's just like, this is crazy, I can't buy, I'm just going to rent.
Well, I mean, that's all this is. Like, rate increases, to me, is just an artificial way to lower demand, right? It's just a way for them to force you to stop buying by making it untenable. But that doesn't solve the core problem of lack of supply. And
it does not. Right.
Most real estate investors know, like, you look at the development rates between the decades, and it's like we're like millions of houses short.
It's like 5 million nationally. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, and so it's like in Portland specifically, we're not going to suddenly see the supply meet the demand because, basically the Fed has decided to squash demand. That didn't make a bunch of houses pop up.
Exactly. Yeah, and I just thought, so Oregon's still like number 2 on the list for locations people are moving to. So it's, lots of people are moving, and that's why I always talk about markets. Market's different, right? Mm-hmm. So you're just because things are happening.
Market.
Yeah,
it's market.
There's no such thing as the real estate market. It's what is your market doing?
Yeah.
And they're all affected by what happens, on a national level, and with monetary policy and all that stuff. They're all affected, but they're not all affected to the same degree or even in the same way, right? So always something you have to be looking at. So you actually hit. I'm not an economist, okay? But
Me neither.
But you hit on a really interesting point where you said, so on the one, you've got the Fed, raising rates, trying to pull back on inflation, and then you've got essentially stimulus.
Yeah.
Well, that's something I
which
heard. Which is inflationary, essentially, right? Yeah. You're putting more. So I think one of the lenders I work with, I should pay more attention to this stuff, and I'm sure I see it, but I think 40% more money in the economy, 40% more than there was like 2 years ago or something like that. That's
insane. How
can you put that much more money in the system and not expect there to be inflation?
Well, it to me, and like you said, I don't claim to be an expert. The way I view it, it seems very simple, but it's just like you have an economy, political system that incentivizes just paying people, like just giving people, like the whole student debt forgiveness thing. Great concept, but it's not debt forgiveness, it's debt transferal, right? It just means that the federal government did not just create that money to then give it to them. They had to get it from somewhere.
It's a tax burden now.
And that's a tax burden from us. So don't get it twisted. Like, they get their money from us. Like,
right.
They don't make their money any other way than just taking it from us. So it's not that they just have all powerful,
right.
They can't just do that. So, in the end, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. Like, maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's not. I had student debt once upon a time. So, like, I would have loved if somebody give me $10,000 off. I also understand on the other side, like, if you don't have student debt, or God forbid you're the person who followed Dave Ramsey and paid off your student debt really, really fast.
Yeah.
And, you just put up your debt-free sign like 6 months ago.
And now you're like, oh, crap.
Oh, gosh, really? But, it is unusual that the federal government and the Fed work against each other. So it's like, So you have inflationary spending on the congressional side, knowing that we have high inflation, and then the Fed is trying to say, we need to get this under control. So you have the forces just going against each other. And this is not something that I came up with. Like, I heard Mikey Taylor. Do you know Mikey Taylor?
No.
I think he's a real estate investor. He's a former pro skateboarder, actually, but he's a real estate investor in California, Southern California, and he was talking about this. He's like, you have, usually when inflation goes crazy, you have the government, the federal government, and the Fed working together to get it under control. And what's unusual about this specifically is you have them not working in concert, but working against each other. Mm-hmm. One is just driving inflationary spending. They just, with a stroke of his pen, Biden just spent $500 billion on student debt forgiveness, not to mention the other large packages that have passed. And last year, the stimulus, that was, the 2021 stimulus, was trillions of dollars. And you're like, so you're just going to keep spending, but at least they called it the the Inflation Reduction Act. So that solves it. Now they're working together.
Yeah, I can't remember who told me, like, whenever they call a bill something, it does the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Well, it's funny. It's like it was
the Inflation Induction Act. Is that
the Inflation Reduction Act that suddenly, as soon as it was passed, it was like a climate bill. After that, like they started calling it a climate bill.
Maybe we should stop while we're ahead on this.
Let's get out of politics. I don't even know. I'm a real estate investor and a contractor.
Man.
What does that dumb roofer know?
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, all stuff to be paying attention to, though, for sure. Yeah, because it all affects what happens in the economy and in real estate. So
ultimately, I think that's the hard part, is determining how aggressive we want to be. I was just at an investor meetup last night. I was talking to two high-level guys, and one of them asked, like, how aggressive do you plan to be in this, slowdown? Because depending on which side you fall on, one side thinks that we are going to see this big crash in real estate. I think you and I are probably more of the opinion that we'll see a slowdown, a leveling off, a return to normalcy. But the fundamental supply and demand problem is that there's just not enough supply for the demand. So even if you short-term lower demand, it doesn't solve the core problem.
And to kind of finish that thought, longer term, I think now in the next year to 2 years is going to be a great opportunity, because as you said,
that's the question.
As you said, we're not solving the supply issue. We're kind of stifling the demand part of it for a while because of the affordability aspect, but the underlying the demand is there, because people need to buy houses and we're way undersupplied. It's just they're stifling it for now based on affordability. But what's going to happen when rates eventually come down again? It's just going to do the same thing again. So if you can position yourself well now over the next couple of years, find good opportunities, you're going to be in a good spot. Yeah. I think when that comes back around. Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to be 2010 and 2011 level deal finding where everything cents on the dollar.
Right.
But you're going to find opportunity. Opportunity will be there. I think the one thing you may find more, this is my personal opinion, Pace Morby?
No. I don't know any of these people you keep saying that. What does that say about me? I don't know.
These are all the people. Dude, I took a personality quiz that just kind of gives you an idea of what you're good at. And my number one was context, which just means I learn from everybody else. And I'm not a creator in myself. Like, I don't sit in a room and dream up ideas. I see other people doing it. And in that context, I'm like, oh, I can repeat what they do.
Right.
So I love being around experts in all these fields because I can copy, basically.
Yep.
Which is probably what I did in high school too much, copying. But
you made it though.
Hey, sort of, but yeah, no, it was. I forget what we were just tracking.
Who did you say?
Pace Morby.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a huge opportunity for creative finance. I think
100%.
You've got older sellers that don't want to pay the outrageous tax burden, so they may sell to you on payments or on owner finance just to spread out their gain into multiple years, so they don't have just a chunk of money that they have to pay the bill on. A tax bill specifically.
You got lots of people with fixed there's long-term rates.
And in a recession where a lot of people are struggling, the ironic thing is, I think there's going to be a lot of even though your price may not crash on your home, suddenly you're not able to make the payments, you get behind, and you need a way out. And things like subject to different creative finance methods to buy homes, I think that's going to be a big one in the next couple of years, because I do think economically, while I don't think real estate and the economy as a whole kind of go in tandem necessarily, it did in 2008, but historically not.
That is a very good point. Yeah, and that's been pointed out by a lot of different experts that people think that because that's what happened most recently. Yeah. But usually in a recession, housing prices continue to go up. Actually.
So I actually don't think that they're gonna be perfectly aligned. People think that that's the case, but that's subprime mortgage crisis. So in general, I don't think that's the case, but I do think people in financial hard times, there will be opportunities to, again, like reverting back to what we talked about at the very beginning, solve problems.
Right.
Yep. Because
if you say that without, like, people think, you're getting ready to take advantage of people. No, like, people are gonna have problems. Like, we all make choices. We all have bad things, can happen, and people lose jobs, and that's not great for them. But you can still come in and solve a problem, and people can see that as predatory. But if you're approaching it with the right intent, that hey, they don't want to lose their house. They probably still have some equity. Like, let's save their equity for them. Let's let them move on. Let's save their credit, and help them out. And you get a property. They get out of their bad situation. They save their credit so that they can move on. Sooner. Right?
I think there's just so many reasons for people to do the things they do. So it's like you're in a bad situation. You do have equity. You could sell the house, but it's going to take 60 to 90 days minimum.
Right. Yeah, especially as days on market.
Yeah, as days on market increase, you're sitting here going, if I list today, yes, I might make $50,000 on my house because I owe less than it's worth.
But I'm behind months already, and
correct.
So,
or you're sitting here going, I need to move for a job, or you're behind, and now you have 30 days to figure it out and can't sell your house that fast. Yeah. So sometimes speed is time is of the essence, and speed. I mean,
people make the wrong assumption that price and that the money piece of it is the most important piece for a homeowner, for a seller.
Not always.
And a lot of times it's not. I mean, I would say the majority of the time that's a big factor, because they need whatever they need to be able to move on and do what they're going to do. But there's other factors. And I think that's a really big wrong assumption that people, nobody would sell their house for anything but the top dollar of the market. That's not true. There's so many different reasons why people sell, and so many different factors. Like you said, speed and reliability and assuredness and just simplicity and all of those things. I don't want to deal with budget people coming through my home. I'd rather just be done or whatever. There's lots of reasons, lots of motivations. Yep.
And in 2020, there were a lot of people who didn't want people coming through their home.
Right. Very true.
That was a big deal.
Very true. So, awesome. I think we hit everything. We talked about the market. We talked about being resilient and getting through things. We could. I don't even know how long we've been talking.
We could go full Joe Rogan 3 hours, I'm sure.
Okay, you got one more name drop because you've already said, so who else are we going to...
Bro, I could go on to that too. Ryan Pineda, do you ever follow him?
No, I suck at following people apparently.
Dude, I have my list. I'm just a millennial,
Okay, so here's the task for everybody.
Do you count as a millennial?
I don't know. I'm the lost generation part or whatever. Where I'm like right in between or whatever. Yeah, where I'm not smart enough with my technology, but I'm like right at the end. Yeah.
So you're
what is that?
Gen Malexel. I don't know.
Okay, so I guess everybody, if they want to know cool people to follow, they should just follow you and then see who you follow.
Just DM me. I'll give you a list.
There you go.
Because literally, I have guys that every time I'm talking with anybody, people ask me, "Do you follow this guy? Do you follow that guy?"
And then you're like, "Nope, but I do now, right?"
It's really everybody's an expert in something. I follow Grant Cardone, but I'm not like a Grant Cardone guy. But I can
There's
appreciate.
Tidbits you can get from.
I can appreciate the way I consume content creators, if you will, is I eat the meat and spit out the bones. It's like I take what I like from them and I throw out the rest. I know a lot of people are a big fan of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Mm-hmm.
I read a few chapters of that book and I was just like, I don't want all my thoughts to be about money and and absorbing that as the primary. And I understand a lot of people got a ton of good value from it. I didn't care for it. Yeah. But there's other books that I vibe with that I'm like, I would love to recommend things like The Go-Giver. I just read that this year. And I fully agree with things like that basically the more you give, the more you receive. I think it's loosely a biblical principle. And so that's my thing is just giving. It's like, and I think that goes right along with what we were just talking about is I am fully happy, and I have met with sellers and just been like, you realize you could get way more money by listing this, and they're not in a hurry and they don't have any reason to be selling to me, and I'm like, you can get 50 grand more by listing this.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't care, and sometimes they're like, no, really? And and I'm happy to hand them off to a realtor and be like, yeah, you should pursue that. Yep. And I never see them again. So I'm okay with absolutely. It. I don't need every deal.
Yep. So. Yep, providing the right solution and not just sometimes not just steering it the way that you want it to go.
The solution isn't always me, believe it or not.
Yeah. I do like that though. Like, I think a lot of people gravitate towards one person or two people, and it's like
an acolyte.
Yeah, and it's like, well, whatever they say, like, is gospel or whatever. It's like I got to follow exactly what they do, and I've done that before in the past with certain people, and I finally figured out like what you said. You take the pieces that work for you. You don't have to take someone's model and just like cookie cutter it into you, because it may not work. It probably won't work because everybody's got different personalities and different ways of approaching things, and but you can take pieces of it and fit it in and say, okay, what part of this fits me and what I want to do and what I believe, and then from other experts, you may not agree with everything that they say, but you may find little tidbits in there that work for you. So.
Yeah, I love a lot of what Ryan Pineda says, a lot of what Pace Morby says. Not all. Yeah. I think Pace Morby now. You should follow him. He's a really interesting guy, but I think he has a show. He has a TV show now on A&E. So I followed him before it was cool, though.
I'm gonna be there someday. No, I don't want a show. So.
I do not want a TV show. I actually had somebody pitch me on the idea of a mobile home flipping show. Not seriously, like A&E or something, but like it was like a lower level assistant of somebody or whatever. And I was just like, I have no desire to be famous ever.
Right.
So
right.
That's the one thing about content creation that I don't really want to do content creation like a Ryan Pineda. I know you don't follow him, but he's huge into content creation.
If you keep saying his name, I probably will. So
he's a great follow too. I like him. I like a lot of the stuff he talks about, but he's a Bigger Pockets guest. Mm-hmm. That's how I found him and followed and all that. But he's a guy that I take a lot of what he says. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. But some of it, I'm just like, I'm not as much of a fan of. It's like you take it and leave it.
Yeah.
And there's nobody. There's very few. I find I take less from like a Grant Cardone than I do from a Ryan Pineda. I like more of Ryan Pineda stuff. But you can get a little something from anybody.
Exactly. Yep. So if people want to connect with you and find out more about...
Oh, man.
Yeah, what's the best way to do that? You're all over social media, right?
Yeah. No. I do have social media, but not much. I would say Instagram, but I'm not really that much on Instagram anymore either. But you can reach out to me. You can find my number anywhere. livinghoperoofing.com. Living Hope Roofing on Instagram. Living Hope Renovations on Instagram. Let's see. Living Hope Renovations on YouTube. Awesome. There's a lot of places to find me. I imagine if you just Google Daniel Derrick, you probably would find me.
We're gonna find out. I'm gonna try it.
I can't
believe you don't know that. You should know.
I'm not thinking enough to Google myself.
You know what? If you Google Ben Nelson, you'll find a lot of people because like the most common name.
It's a John Smith of names. Yeah, I know.
Well, hey, thanks for hanging out and chatting. It's been awesome. I've had a lot of fun, and hopefully it's been inspirational to everyone listening, and they learned a lot. And hey, get some.
We're all just trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, just get out there and don't let those setbacks stop you. We're all gonna have them. Life will hit you. Kick you when you're down, and then kick you again.
That's why I love real estate and business in general. Is like, in 5 years, I've built something where I now am the one who takes my daughter to leukemia treatments. Because my wife needs to stay with the other two kids, and it's like owning your own business, developing systems, all those kind of things. It's life changing. I'm not a millionaire, billionaire. I don't own a bazillion, bazillion dollars worth of real estate yet. But the time freedom that it already is giving me, and the ability to take care of my family in a powerful way, it's what we do it for. It's why we're all here.
That's the why.
Awesome. That's the why.
Thanks again for being here.
Absolutely.